Good evening. Whoops. I forget that part when I'm on Zoom. Good evening. It is Wednesday, May 15, 2024. Welcome to the work session of the recommended budget for the City of Laramie. We will begin with public comment on non-agenda items. If anyone is online.
City Clerk, could you let Ms. Pearson?
If anyone's online that would like to make a comment, please raise your hand. Seeing no one in the audience, we will continue. City Manager, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Council, we're starting off, as you'll recall, tonight with the Public Works Department, and we'll start in the General Fund, which is on page 71, and a few minor supplemental additions to the budget recommended on page 42. Brooks Webb will walk us through the General Fund, then we'll move to our enterprise funds of water, sewer, and solid waste.
Vice Mayor, Council, good evening. I'm a little disappointed my fellow department heads didn't come for support tonight. But Deputy Director Klein's here and Utility Superintendent Scott Palm's here, so we got some backup. So yeah, page 71, 72, Public Works has 4 divisions that operate within the general fund. Administration makes up 6% of the Public Works general fund budget. Fleet is 9%. Engineering's 30%. Streets about 55%. Administrative division provides administrative leadership, support services, and capital project administrative support to the entire department. The administration also provides support to City Council, other departments, Traffic Commission, Laramie Building Authority, and the Ranch Advisory Board. Some of the goals and accomplishes that we noted on page 72, I'm not going to go through every one of them, but a couple highlights. Last year we had the final completion of the Municipal Operations Center and relocated all staff and equipment to the site. We assisted with review of the Consumptive Use Plan, Emissions Reduction Plan, Laramie Growth Plan, and the Aquifer Protection Plan. We continually work to strengthen our interagency partnership relationships with folks like YDOT, the university, UPRR, the county, school district. And then we researched and applied for multiple grants for infrastructure over the last couple of years. Currently, last year we submitted 2 letters of interest with NRCS for 2 different projects. For the Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Grant. Both of those total about $30 million, and we're currently in the feasibility review process with NRCS. And then recently, in conjunction with engineering, we applied for or put in our letter of intent for TAP grant for $1 million for the Build Nye pathway. Currently, we're planning on funding that through the general fund, so if we're successful in that, that'll help out with the general fund. And then we're currently working on an SRF application, as you know, for the West Laramie Lift Station. And then one of the things I was pretty excited about was we requested and received an interest reduction on 8 SRF loans last year. The State Loan and Investment Board changed their rules to lower interest rates on future loans, and we decided to call up Office of State Lands and say, hey, can we apply this to some of our existing loans? And they said, well, give us a letter and we'll put it on the board agenda and we'll see. And so we did, and hit the board agenda, and they approved it. Since then, I think all municipalities have done the same. So it lowered those on those 8 loans, lowered from 2.5% to 1.5%. So a 1% drop on the interest rate, which may not sound like a lot, but when you're talking about tens of millions of dollars on 20 and 30-year term loans, it's a substantial amount of money. We also applied for 3 ARPA applications in 23. As you know, one of those was approved, the $2.9 million for the Sea Line project, which has begun. It's over on 6th Street. Councilor Doherty was asking me about it earlier, and that'll continue through the summer and hopefully wrap up this summer. Some of our objectives going forward is will be continue to seek grant and loan funding options to help supplement the budget, continue researching ways to reduce carbon emissions within city operations, complete full cost of service rate studies for all enterprise funds. So we're going to be working on water, wastewater, and solid waste rate studies. And then already accomplished one of the goals with your help for next year was to complete the purchase of the City Springs project property. So thank you for that. I can go over our supplementals over on page 42. For Public Works Administration, we've got a few there. The first one is a decrease in rugs. So the Municipal Operations Center, we have rugs when you come in, so we don't track mud and everything throughout the building. And we found out that during the summer we didn't need those rugs changed out and laundered as often as we do in the wintertime, so we were able to bring that service down. And then some appropriations for city utilities, and then some other items, elevator services, fire alarm services, fire extinguisher services, just kind of typical things. And then we're requesting a little bit of funding for basically coffee and water at public meetings. We don't supply it at all public meetings, but sometimes we have 4-hour-long public meetings, and having some coffee and water there for the public is nice. And then conference room furniture, $3,000. We've got those 2 big conference rooms out there at the Municipal Operations Center that are being heavily utilized. And we thought we got enough furniture in there, but some of those meetings get pretty big, so we'd like to get a couple extra tables and chairs just to accommodate everybody. And then a small uniform request for the administrative coordinator, who is the liaison to multiple boards and commissions, and this helps identify her during those meetings and in public meetings. And then on page 43 for, yes, I'm sorry.
Councilor Richardson?
Yes.
Just out of curiosity, are the conference room usage, is that mostly for city employees, or are we getting like outside groups utilizing that space too? And is that a way, if we are we renting that out? Is that an opportunity to make a little bit of money? Yeah,
Councilor Richardson, through you, Vice Mayor. Currently it's city and then city partners. So YDOT uses it quite a bit for training. Today, DCI was in there doing training for most of the day. Laramie Leadership uses it sometimes, so kind of our partners. We haven't opened it up to just the general public at this point. It's just being so heavily utilized with our kind of partner agencies, if you will. It's been hard to do. I know we've done Town and Gown out there. Yeah, not charging any partners. And then lots of our internal WARM training, our ERP trainings, a lot of those have been out there. So busy rooms. They've been awesome. Yeah. On page 43 for supplementals, under streets, we're requesting some funding for our weather station subscriptions. The streets division installed 4 weather stations around town. I don't remember the intersections, I'm sorry, but they really help them with predicting what's happening for brine applications and snow plowing things. These stations actually show us the surface temperature on the street, so we know when things are freezing. And the company, when we put them in, gave us a 1-year free subscription, and of course they got us on the hook now, right? So now we got to pay. But they've been super helpful. We're also looking at making those weather stations public facing. So that the public can get on and kind of see. They're kind of neat. You can go back and graph out what's happened in the past, and I think there's even some future prediction stuff in there. And then under the centrally budgeted adjustments is really utility type stuff. And then there is on page 45 for engineering, there is one, I didn't even talk about engineering yet, but anyway, there is one personnel request, and that is $33,573 for a part-time intern. Our engineering group's been working quite a bit with the university's engineering class and also project management. They started up some project management courses a few years ago, and we've been working back and forth with them and see an opportunity there to bring in an intern to help with some of our workload and get them some experience. Okay, if I can go, I talked about the administration, so if we can jump back to 7273, do a quick overview on engineering. So engineering manages the design and construction of most of our capital construction projects, as you know. Other responsibilities that they take on is their traffic engineering, storm drainage engineering, and the GIS section falls underneath them also. The division also serves as a point of contact for our development review functions. So when Derek's group sends out development for review, that goes through engineering, and then they kind of they feed it out to the rest of the department, the utility division, solid waste, so on and so forth, and then they take all the comments back and get those back to Derek and his group. Some of their goals and accomplishments was they completed the initial assessment of all the ADA ramps throughout the city. That was part of the original PCI process. It was kind of a high-level inventory more than anything. I think, as you know, we're moving into the real identification that'll occur this summer, where they're driving all the sidewalks, all the ADA ramps, taking LiDAR shots of everything, and going to give us a really good inventory. It's going to, the report's going to look very similar to our PCI report, so we'll really be able to look at that, prioritize areas, and be able to look at future projects.
Councilor O'Doherty.
I think there's confusion even among some of us counselors. If sidewalks are a barrier to people being able to wheel down the sidewalk in a wheelchair or something, who owns the sidewalks, and yeah, how's that work? Who's responsible?
Yeah, Councilor Doherty, through you, Vice Mayor, we have these discussions a lot. So state statute requires that the abutting property owner and also city code requires that the abutting property owner is responsible for the maintenance of the sidewalk. But the majority of those are in the city right away, so owned by the city. It's confusing.
Love that. The owners love that.
Councilor Richardson.
So follow up to that, the owner is tasked with maintaining it, but if it needs repair, is maintenance, like if it's starting to crumble, does that become city responsibility? Or, I mean, or does, I'm assuming that's maintenance, and so is property, but is there an area where it turns to not property?
It's property owner responsibility to maintain. If they don't maintain it and it fails, it's still property owner's responsibility. We do have a program that we help with ADA ramps. So if somebody on the corner is replacing sidewalk and they contact us, we'll work with them, because that's more expensive to do that ADA section and make those upgrades. And we'll work with them to help pay for the cost of the ADA upgrades. But the sidewalk itself is their responsibility.
That's still, okay, just
Yeah.
double checking if there's a time where it might shift over to city, but you are helpful in the ADA process.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor O'Doherty.
And I know there was discussion of using TAPS funding for helping with sidewalks. Is that still a possibility, or are we using it all up on cool bike trails? And
Yeah, our plan, Councilor Doherty, is once we get this assessment done this year, we should get that final report later this fall. We're planning to come and have a work session with you all to show you that information. And then next year's TAP grant, we've discussed internally about applying for funds to enact the recommendations within that plan.
I just wanted to clarify. So the responsibility of the property owner to maintain adjacent sidewalk originates in Wyoming state statute. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay,
And
thank
I'm
you.
going to memorize the statute because I get asked that so many times, I need to just
Yes.
memorize it.
I think some people think it came out of the city of Laramie, but it actually, I appreciate your clarification that it is state
The
statute.
city has a similar code that just piggybacks on the state.
Okay. Counselor Newman?
When we pave Wyoming Ave in West Laramie, will there be sidewalks? And if so, the city is just going to pay for all that, right? We're not going to each individual homeowner and be like, you owe us X amount of dollars.
Yeah, Counselor Newman, we planned for that in the project. Yes, there will be curb gutter sidewalk. I don't know if you've noticed out there, we had to have some people move their fences back because they were in the right of way.
Oh, I've been
I'm
watching.
sure. Yeah.
It's nice.
We-
I
So,
like it.
so yeah, curb gutter sidewalk out there. We also, on our other projects, when we're designing a street project, part of that design is to go out and evaluate the current curb gutter sidewalk. And if there are sections there that are especially impeding drainage, we'll take care of those as part of the project, because, to come into a homeowner and all of a sudden and just be like, hey, you got to do all this work. It's just not feasible for them a lot of times. And so we build that into the project. And sometimes it'll be, maybe it's the whole block, and sometimes it's just some spot repairs. But the main part of that is just to get the drainage properly. We don't want to put in a new road and the drainage be messed up and then make the road worse. Okay, all right. So continuing on with engineering, engineering works with, I have broadband agencies, but really they work with all our utilities to work on franchise agreements. The broadband's just been a big one lately. They work with residents regarding their ADA upgrades. They complete inspections of developments to ensure proper construction of the public infrastructure. They've been working with, we've had some kind of preliminary discussions with YDOT regarding the Snowy Range Road corridor, and I bring that up because that's part of your goals. And we're planning on doing a water project in there, and then they'll be coming in after us to do some street work in there. And so talking with them about future improvements there, and we're working, so we've been discussing that with YDOT, and Todd, Assistant City Manager, is in those discussions with us. Engineering also helps with the project management on large projects, everything, North Tank, North Outfall, B2, C-Line, all the projects you guys hear about, all the projects you all award, they're doing a lot of the project management out there on those. They created a public-facing GIS map that provides information for all road closures, disabled parking spots, and city construction projects within the city. And engineering with administration collaborates with the university and YDOT on all large projects. Streets, page 74. So the street division is responsible for all the street maintenance and repair, pavement markings, drainage system maintenance, maintenance and repair, snow and ice removal, street sign maintenance, traffic signals, street light maintenance, anything even remotely related to a street, our street guys are on it. It's a crew of about 8 guys. They do an amazing job. They maintain 129 miles of paved streets, 56 miles of unpaved streets and alleys, 22 signalized intersections, 410 street lights, 1,672 stormwater inlets, 668 manholes, 52 miles of storm pipe. So they are a busy, busy crew. Some of their goals and accomplishments: they cleaned 16,000 feet of storm pipe and over 68 inlets with their sewer jet this last year. They replaced a couple alley approaches that were problematic for our solid waste trucks. As they come out of the alley, they were kind of bottoming it out. And as part of that, they made sure that they were ADA compliant. They continue the use of the salt brine, and they've improved that application. The salt brine process is pretty neat. So those systems to make that brine and apply that brine They're about a $30,000 system. Our guys built it from scratch from extra parts they had laying around. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it works great, and the guys are really proud of it. They repaired 8 crosswalks this last summer with thermoplastic. The thermoplastic lasts 5 to 7 years in the crosswalks where, your typical paint is a year and you're done. So that helps us with future stuff. They installed 8 rapid flashing beacon crosswalks by elementary schools and the middle school. They assisted engineering with the PCI study. They applied 9,500 square yards of asphalt, applied 18 tons of crack seal. They used over 5,600 gallons of paint to refresh the pavement markings, and they replaced burned out bulbs and signals and street lights with LEDs. Fleet division, they're responsible for maintaining all the city vehicles. 343 vehicles is what they tell me. They also handle many small pieces of equipment and small engines. These guys work on everything from fire trucks and Zambonis to chainsaws and lawnmowers. It's pretty amazing the work they do. They also are responsible for the acquisition of new and replacement vehicles. So these folks write up all the specifications. They work with departments to right-size the vehicles they need, and then they go out to bid, and then that's when we come to you and ask for a bid award. But they put all that together with the departments. These are the folks that are really exploring the emission reduction systems on vehicles, and they're excited about it. They're looking at stuff all the time. They've been bidding for hybrid units, EVs, and idle reduction technology whenever it's available. And one of their, I thought was neat, their goals that they sent me was continue to strive for 100% customer satisfaction. Okay, do you want me to roll right into water?
No, we'll do financial position.
Perfect.
So that's general fund, public works, if you have any questions. Otherwise, we're going to move to water. Director Wade will talk to us about the financial position of the water fund, and then Brooks will come up and walk through his expenditure requests.
Good evening, Honorable Vice Mayor and City Council members. I have the pleasure of discussing the financial condition of our enterprise funds with you this evening. Just remember, as an orientation, our enterprise funds are our business type funds, and what that means is that they are self-supporting. They're self-supporting in terms of the rates that they generate, to develop sufficient reserve to pay for capital over the long term. We plan for a 10-year period in these funds. And so when you all are considering recommended adjustments to the rate, that's really the time period that we're looking at when we're managing this fund. And so when we talk about financial condition, we are not only looking at that immediate financial condition, which of course we don't do in any fund, but we are looking at the ability of that fund over the 10-year period with normal, what we would consider to be maybe inflationary rate increases to pay for the cost of these services to our citizens. In the water fund, I would advise you that it is in good financial health with all major infrastructure initiatives proceeding as planned. It is in good financial health even after the Hart Ranch acquisition, which, as you know, was significant and resulted in about $1.2 million in additional debt service over a 5-year period. And so my assessment includes that acquisition, which is very encouraging indeed, because we all know how important that purchase was to the city of Laramie. And I would note that had we not been planning long-term for this fund for a long time now, a purchase of that kind would not have been possible. And so it's worth taking a minute to applaud you for your work there and keeping that fund healthy. As you know, we did complete a one-year analysis of the revenue requirement necessary to support both the water and wastewater funds this last year. You adopted a rate increase just a couple of months ago, and so that would be fresh on your mind. That was 5% in water as well as 5% in wastewater. As Director Webb said, you have a full year of enterprise rate analysis ahead of you, and so we'll save additional conversation for that time. You should know that those will be full rate studies, but this year, the rate that you adopted was based on a full 10-year financial plan, just like all of the rates that we bring to you. So I want to offer you assurance in that way.
Councilor Doherty.
So I don't understand the difference in what you just said, that we did 1 year and we do 10 years. So would you mind, or maybe or were you talking about stormwater or something? No?
Honorable Vice Mayor, through you, when we prepare a full financial analysis, you're always doing it at a point in time based on the information you have today. It's important that we do these full plans once a biennium, like the full cost of service analysis, with the best assumptions we had. We had gotten off cycle, as you'll remember Director Webb describing during that work, and so we needed to go ahead and do a one-year review based on what we know this year, but next year will be much more comprehensive, in fact. Not necessarily from the financial planning standpoint, that's still 10 years, but from that cost of service standpoint across the rate classes. So if we look at revenue trends in the water fund over time, what does it look like in the last 10 years? Well, in the water fund, what we see over 10 years is about 20% or $1.56 million growth in that same time period. I did a little Googling yesterday to look at what inflationary growth has been in the same time period. I can report to you that that's at 29%, and so the city has kept the cost of this utility to the public well below the inflationary rate. We're able to do that through a combination of aggressive grant and loan seeking, which the Public Works Department continues to be very, very good at, as well as just fiscal responsibility and good management of these utilities. So that is encouraging too, particularly because we all bear the burden of inflationary pressure. We know our citizens bear that too. If we look at expenditures in the water fund over time, which you'll notice in the graph on page 96, you'll see, which is the case in most city operations, that our operating expenses, our personnel expenses, our contractual services don't change much over time. We're pretty, the city manager is pretty stingy, I don't know if that's the right word, but sparing, we'll call it sparing, in the supplemental requests that she approves. And so what you notice over time is there's not a lot of growth in those major operating categories. You are going to see a lot of variability, though, in capital projects and investment, as well as associated debt service. And so those spikes you see on the expenditure graphs, they behave very similarly across all of our funds, but in particular, our enterprise funds look almost exactly like each other in this regard. Moving on, I would report to you that at the end of 2023, we did meet our internal requirement to have 6 months of reserve on hand. Our minimum is 3 to 6 months, and so the water fund had healthy reserves. We are not worried in that way, which does include, like on top of that, we have an infrastructure reserve in these funds. And so the 3 to 6 months is really what we want to have on hand for operating emergencies. So think about like water breaks we don't plan for, big emergencies. We do not, this reserve does not include that infrastructure money that is on hand to support the capital plan that we review with you during the recommended budget work sessions. And you will also notice that for the 2025 and 2026 budget, we are in balance through the use of some of those reserves allocated to infrastructure improvement. We are using about $3 million in reserves in 2025 and $4.6 million in reserves in 2026. This is very normal. If you did not build up your reserves in these capital-intensive funds, you actually would have insufficient rate to pay for capital when it becomes due. And so there are years where you spend more of that reserve than others, and there's years where you keep a little bit more of that in your pocket than others for future investment. And if you think about our big projects that are 6, 7, 8 million, you can see why that would be necessary, because some of these projects can swing quite a bit. Now, we have been very lucky that some of our biggest projects we've attained grant and loan funding for. As I look at the projections in this fund and the summary of what happened in 2023, I can tell you that water fund operating revenue grew in 2023 by 12.6%. That's a little bit misleading. Most of that growth was actually a rebound in the market valuation of investments, because remember, in 2022, the bottom fell out in terms of the value of even federal securities, which is all we can hold as the city. Securities backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. And so that gives you a little bit of an idea of the extent of unrealized loss that not only the city but other organizations experienced and had to recognize because of that market swing. Now, that is unrealized loss because we hold these securities to maturity. We will not experience that loss in the long term. So it's very different than if you were investing in the stock market, say, and I want to make sure that I point that out. If we look at operating expenses in the same period, they increased about 44%, but most of that was due to debt service on the Hart Ranch, that accelerated debt payment. You all remember what happened there. We were hoping to finance that purchase for a longer period of time, but because of the uncertain interest rate environment, we were only able to get a 5-year financing term for that purchase, which is very fast to pay back a purchase of that magnitude. Now, as I look at the water fund in 2024, I can tell you that it will benefit, the revenue side of that fund will benefit from the rate increase that you approved just a couple of months ago, but only a little bit because it wasn't in effect until April. There was another rate increase that was in effect last January that we'll see a full year of, and that was 3.75%. So the revenue in this fund will steadily grow and keep up with inflationary increases. The water fund in 2024 will experience growth in personnel expenditures, just like all city funds. The impact of that growth really depends on it will vary based on how that fund was impacted by the compensation study. And what I mean by that is this. Not all positions came back needing similar adjustments. And so there were some funds, and the water fund was one of these funds, where the study showed that we needed to increase compensation across this fund in a pretty significant way. And so it's going to look like a big increase in this fund because it's smaller in comparison to, say, the general fund, where smaller increases might offset larger increases. This fund, it was larger increases across the fund. And so when you see that, when we talk about it next year, I just want to give you that heads up. There were no differences in how the study was conducted for this fund, and all employees were treated fairly and equitably. As we look at expenses for the year, other than that, we're seeing reducing inflation, which is nice, but still costs that are rising significantly higher than they were several years ago. But it seems like the space of things increasing late by 10 and 20% seem to have tapered down a little bit, which is great news for us, in particular in these funds. I would be happy to pause at this time and take any questions you have about the financial condition of the water fund before I move into an overview of the revenue forecast for 2024, or 25, I'm sorry.
Councilors, are there any questions? I see none online either, so continue, Director Webb.
When you look at the revenue forecast for 25 and 26 for the biennium on page 98, what you'll notice, and I think this is a great time to point it out, is that there is no capital revenue budgeted. You might think that's very strange, and it is a little strange. Normally, you see a lot of rebudgeted capital revenue creeping into the first year of that biennium, and you see some revenue on new projects. Now, it just happens to be that none of the forecasted projects do have new funding sources in 25 or 26, and that is true. And the financial plan supports that, and there's nothing to be concerned about. However, if you remember, this budget does not, the recommended budget does not contain rebudgeted amounts for expenditures, nor does it contain rebudgeted amounts for revenue. You will consider a budget amendment complete with funding sources in the fall to bring those appropriations and funding sources forward. And so after we amend the budget for those amounts, this revenue forecast will look a little different, as will the expenditure forecast. I really appreciate that we do not have to include rebudgets in our normal appropriation process now, because I think you as the council and members of the public have a clearer sense of what those new appropriations are, what we're actually allocating to government, rather than those totals being somewhat muddied by what have been rather large rebudgets over the years, well in tens of millions of dollars, in fact. And so I'm really excited about this change, but it will take a little bit of getting used to. If any of you have questions about it, I encourage you to reach out to me. Now, beyond that in the revenue forecast, what I'd like to point out is there's not much different. I would note that in 2024, I am forecasting revenue from water charges to land beneath the budget I originally developed for this revenue. That is due to an unusually wet summer last year and reduced revenue from irrigation because of that. We are expecting that revenue to recover over time, but I am basing my 25 and 26 forecast on a 5% increase over where I expect 2024 to end. Next year, I will adjust the fiscal year 2026 forecast if consumption patterns warrant it. But I wanted to at least explain why you're seeing me forecast a reduction for this year and how I come up with the increase for 25 and 26. You'll also note that 26 is forecasted for water charges at the same amount as 2025. That's because you have not approved any rate increases at this time, and I will only forecast those rate increases as they are approved, are recommended.
Councilor Doherty.
When did we start losing the revenue from the golf course?
I do not think I am the best person in this room to answer that question through you, Vice Mayor.
I think it was now, I think this is our third summer, I guess. Does that sound about right to you guys? Yeah, third summer.
So, okay, thank you.
Continue.
Vice Mayor, that completes my presentation on revenue. I'm happy to answer any more questions.
Council, are there any questions? I see none online either. So thank you. Thank you very much, Director Wade.
Thank you. So, Council, as we move to expenditures and the recommended budget, I'll remind you I'm recommending one position for the water fund. Brooks can give you the detail of that. And the expenditure summary is on page 100, bottom of the page, and carrying over onto page 101. You'll see the total recommended budget for the water fund for the first year of the biennium at $14.6 million, the second year of the biennium at $15.9 million. I'm recommending an addition of budget amounting to $135,650 in the first year and $41,650 in the second year. For the first year of the biennium, that means that the operating adjustment that I'm recommending for you is less than 1% at 0.71%. Brooks will talk about the detail of those recommended additions to the budget, including the personnel.
Council, so page 102. There's a nice pie chart up at the top there that shows our biennium budgeted expenditures And you can see in this fund, and you'll see this in the wastewater fund also, that our capital project studies and equipment is a huge chunk of the pie there. In this fund, 43%. So this is where a lot of the work goes, is into those big capital projects, maintaining and improving the system. So our water utility division is responsible for the treatment and distribution of approximately 200 million gallons of water per year. They operate and maintain the water treatment plant, wells, PRVs, pump stations, tanks, installing and repairing water meters, replacing and repairing water lines. These are the folks that make the water come out of your faucet. They maintain 270 miles of water mains, and they treat 4.31 million gallons daily on average. More in the summer, obviously, less in the winter. Some of their goals and accomplishments include the staff has completed approximately, I think your book says 80%, but we're at 90% now, of the required visual inspection and identification regarding the EPA lead and copper mandate. That is due to be done and submitted before October 2024. We've got, I think we're around 250 left, something like that. So around 250 left.
Councilor Doherty.
Can I take an opportunity to brag about our city? Because this is a really big deal. My daughter's in this field, and so many cities aren't even close to getting through this. And so the fact that our team was so proactive, I think, deserves a hooray. Thank you.
Agreed. Okay, staff provided input and professional guidance for the Casper Aquifer Protection Plan. We had a group that went through that plan and provided a lot of comment and feedback. We had our first EPA inspection of the Utility Emergency Response Risk and Resiliency Plan, and we had no deficiencies, which was fantastic. Staff implemented and upgraded the digitized 811 locate ticket system specific to water and wastewater. So when all these folks are out there boring holes or digging something, they have to put in locate tickets, and our staff go out and locate the water and wastewater, and they've digitized that system and made that easier to use. As we were coming into spring, we were getting hundreds and hundreds of them from the fiber folks who are going across town, and so staff's been really busy with locates. Utility Division formed a formal utility leadership team, was established to address utility challenges and succession planning. So Sean and Scott have gotten together, our supervisors and lead operators, and are meeting with them on a regular basis, mentoring them, and really working on succession planning, and it's been amazing. It's the guys it's like a whole different group, and they come out of the room laughing and they're having a good time. As you know, we had a work session last month on the implementation of the North Tank Activation Plan. That's began, and staff will continue with that activation plan as more come online. And then going forward, implementing the valve and fire hydrant replacement programs that's that was in the capital budget, and then we will be posting the results of the lead and copper mandate stuff for public view later in the year. Operating supplementals are on page 102. I'm not going to go through every one here, but if you got questions, feel free. Sean, Deputy Director Klein, this wasn't her first year doing budget, but it was her first full year with Public Works doing budget, and Scott's first full year doing budget. So they got with their folks and really went through their operating budget, operating lines to kind of right-size things, get things where they need to go. So you see some, maybe some more than what we see in some of the other divisions, but that's why it's getting that operating budget for them cleaned up. I wouldn't call it stingy, but Janine does a great job at when we meet with Janine, she's like, can you absorb this here? Can you absorb that there? She does a great job with that. And a lot of times we do, and we are able to do that. But in the water and the wastewater, we had a lot of changes that we needed to do. So I'll just hit some of the highlights here. In the water administration, we have a $20,000 deduction. So we were paying to store one of our Vactors in a heated garage so that it didn't freeze. Now that we're at the MOC, we don't need to do that storage anymore. So we take that $20,000 off. Jumping over to page 103 under pumps and wells. We've got a large number there, $80,000. This is a one-time increase to provide painting on the Zone 2 tanks. The tank was inspected and has some paint falling off, some deterioration, and so requires repainting. Also under pumps and wells, the UCMR5, and I don't know what that stands for. I can't remember. I did look it up. But anyway, it's for the PFAS sampling that's required by the EPA, the forever chemicals that we've all been hearing about. EPA is requiring that sampling, and so we need some funding to do that additional sampling. And there may be some grant funding that's available to help supplement that.
Councilor Newman, you had a question?
How often do we have to repaint tanks? I know it just says one time, but when's the last time we had to repaint it?
I think this is a great question for our utility superintendent, Scott Pond.
It's actually been close to 20 years since they've been on that.
20 years. It probably depends on the tank and the conditions and where it's located and stuff, I would guess, but 20 years in general, it sounds like. So, yep. I'll hop down to water treatment. You see we've got a $21,000 increase in freight, but we've got a $17,000 decrease in chemicals. The chemical prices are finally starting to come down. We had some budget amendments in previous years coming out of the pandemic when those prices went way up. So the chemical prices are coming down, freight prices are going up. And the water treatment and equipment and repair, its routine equipment request is $35,000, but I just wanted to note that that's being moved from routine equipment, and so it's really a $0, even though it looks like a $35,000 here. It's moving from our routine equipment. On page 104, our road material decrease of $50,000 is just, we weren't using that much anymore, so we decided it was a good idea to decrease it. And then traffic control equipment and PPE, again, under transmission. We haven't purchased any new traffic control or the PPE we're getting all the time, but the traffic control devices such as barricades, cones, things like that, they wear out over time, they break over time, and so we need to replace and upgrade those items to keep our folks safe out there. Did you want to talk about ranch operations and water rights? Okay.
Yeah. So council, with respect to the supplementals for ranch operations and water rights, you'll see some adjustment here. Working with Jay Smith and Jay working with staff and administrative services, and we've been fine-tuning these two budgets to better capture where expenses related to water rights should land and where ranch just ongoing operational costs should land. So you'll see some decreases up and down, making movements between those two cost centers. I would like to emphasize, though, that one of the things that we are recommending is the addition of some tools and shop supplies and other just materials that the staff can use now that we will be taking over operation of the Monolith Ranch during this biennium to perform work on site, as opposed to bringing in contractors to do work for us, perform services for us, or do heavy equipment kinds of activities like road work. So we're trying to bring in-house, I guess is what I would say, a lot of things that we used to contract out for, recognizing that we have a ranch manager now. We have Mr. Smith supervising the ranch manager, and then we're bringing the seasonals on as well to help with irrigation. One of the requests that we have focused on here is, I would point out the $12,000 in the first year of the biennium. We had been leasing or renting heavy equipment, and again, we are expecting to do a little bit more of that kind of work, and since we have staff to operate the equipment, it's cheaper for us to do that than to hire dirt workers to come out with their heavy equipment. And lastly, I'd point out we are looking to expend a little bit on safety supplies, notably to purchase safety beacons for our ranch staff, and that includes our seasonal irrigators who will be out there. I get worried about them. All of them, they're kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and if something were to happen, there isn't always the best cell service out there, so we will be equipping folks with some kind of safety beacon when we land on the right technology. We think we figured out what we want, but we haven't quite nailed it down yet. Brooks, I'm going to skip forward to personnel, and then you can jump in there. For the ranch also, as we contemplate personnel expenses, I am recommending a slight increase in part-time pay for the ranch, and I'm on page 106, so that we can average 75 hours of work per week for 20 weeks. Last year, we learned a lot, being on the Hart Ranch for the first season, about the amount of time needed to effect the irrigation on that new property. And so this is based on our lived experience of last year and adjusting the budget to bring those expense lines up so that we have proper coverage. Also recommending an overtime increase that's in line with the increase in hours for part-time workers. And then in water rights, also a slight increase in the overtime line there, as our ranch manager does accrue a certain amount of overtime in the summer supervising those seasonal irrigators. And so again, just adjusting the budget a little bit to cover what we predict that overtime will look like. In total, the adjustments for personnel in the water rights and ranch operations section are about $14,000 per year.
Yeah, sorry I missed this. Janine asked me to cover it, and I zoned out. Anyway, page 106, pumps and wells. We're requesting to add a position of water treatment plant supervisor. Our administrator out there right now has been with us for 38 years and has so much knowledge in his brain. I said when he was here for the work session that he's the smartest man I know, and I still stand by that. And so we'd like to be able to get somebody in a position below him that he can mentor and work with, and Sean and Scott can mentor and work with, to help with that knowledge as we move forward. Lots more EPA mandates keep coming, and so having that extra layer in there will really help us out. And then in meters, we're asking for a one-time part-time increase in fiscal year 25 for some part-time work to help us finish out the lead and copper mandate. We've had some part-time folks helping with that, and they've been a huge help. And I think I'm looking at SLIB actually recently put out some rules about some funding for lead and copper, and I'm investigating to see if we can get some reimbursement on those part-time costs and some of the equipment that we've used for that. We'll see if we can get in there. I think it's primarily for replacement, but maybe I can find a loophole. We'll see. And I just wanted to say too, we talked earlier about the sidewalk stuff. Our folks are so awesome. By the time I sat down, Nancy had already sent me the Wyoming state statute on it. So. 15-4-306.
I'm going to commit that to memory.
Yeah, I'm going to memorize it. I think now if there's no more questions on water, I think Director Wade will take over for the financial position on wastewater.
Council, are there any further questions? Councilor Richardson.
Just one. Just curious, so adding this new full-time position to help with the succession planning, when are we anticipating the current director to, because is it just long-term succession planning, not necessarily this person's leaving in the next?
We don't have a date, and we're not trying to push him out by any means.
Based on the terrible way you talked about him just now.
Yeah, no. So, yeah, but I mean, 38 years with the city, right? I mean,
so eventually it's coming.
Yeah.
So preparing for that.
So
okay.
Preparing.
Thank you.
But hoping, yeah.
And Councilor Gabriel?
Thanks, Vice Mayor. Brooks, I talked with Brooks today about an interesting call I've received. A resident near 22nd and Buford watches a number of trucks come up and haul water away from the fire hydrant there on the corner. So this resident wanted to know what's going on. Are they getting this free water? He sees these different construction trucks and so on. So I called Brooks to get an explanation. I thought it would be interesting, Brooks, if you would tell the council and the public what we discussed today.
Sure, Councilor Gabriel, when he says free water, it makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. No, it's quite common, especially this time of year, as we enter construction season, contractors need water for work, right? And so they contact us and we work with them and we get a hydrant meter set. Our folks read those meters and they are charged what everyone else is charged for water. So our guys keep pretty close track of who's using water and where. And I mean, I'll tell you a quick story. When I was a solid waste manager, I took the water truck out to the landfill, started to fill it up, and someone from Pumps and Wells came pulling and says, "What are you guys doing?" Mike was watching something and knew I was pulling water, and anyway, there's a water meter on that one, and we keep close tabs on those, and they're billed monthly for that usage.
Thank you.
Councilor O'Doherty?
How is the revenue from the hay sales from the ranch? You probably already told us this, but where does that come into the picture?
Where's the revenue booked? Is that the question?
Yeah,
Teresa, there?
is it part of the water fund? And okay, all right,
Yes, it is.
thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Okay.
All right.
So council, we're ready to move to wastewater. That starts on page 111, and Director Wade will talk to us about financial position and revenue.
Vice Mayor, City Council, if we have been talking about the wastewater financial condition with the capital plan that we were working off of last fall as we were developing the rate recommendations to you, I would have told you that the wastewater fund was still in good financial condition. But now, today, I would tell you that it is in stable, albeit declining financial position because of the significant changes, the cost increases that we have experienced in this operation over the last several months. And so our capital plan has been revalued, and the rate that is in effect would not be sufficient to support this utility in the long term. As City Manager Jordan has already indicated to you, staff will be retooling the capital plan over the next year in the out years, not in the current year necessarily, but maybe as we in particular are doing that rate evaluation, because we do need to be sure that we of course meet our capital needs, but also have a rate that the public can bear. Just to give you a little bit of an example, when I look at the capital planning assumptions we were using last September, I have a number over a 4-year period that was $10 million lower than the number before you this evening, and that is adjusting out for loan revenue, which we know has to be paid back, but that's being really conservative. And I want to tell you that just to give you an idea of the scope of the changes for the valuation of capital in this fund. I believe I maybe saw a hand, or if okay. I just want to make sure that if there was a question, I answered it. So we will do a lot of work here to make sure that the fund is in good health, because that's what we want to tell you. And honestly, the fund is still in good health because what's happened in the future what is planned in the future has not yet happened, and we will make adjustments in the next year. When we look at revenue trends in this fund, that's also very telling. This fund has been pretty stable since the time we started doing rates, so much so that it hasn't needed a lot lot of revenue adjustment over time, and as you know, we don't want to recommend those adjustments to you unless it's necessary for the fund. In the same 10-year period that the water fund increased about 20%, the wastewater fund only has increased 14%. Now that's compared to the inflationary growth of 29%, and there are not significantly more proportionally grants and loans in wastewater than there are in water. And so that gives you an idea of how we haven't increased the revenue in this fund much, and the valuation of capital has gone up a lot, which is creating this potentially declining financial position unless we do the right thing, and of course we will, through that long-term planning. When we look at expenditures in this fund, you'll see a chart on page 112. You will see a chart that looks almost exactly like that in the water fund. That's all I'll say about it. Stable operating expenses and variation in capital spending and debt, which one would expect. You'll also notice that we have met at the end of 2023 our commitment to a 3 to 6 month reserve. It's 5 months in the wastewater fund. And you will notice on page 113 that the budget before you is balanced this evening through the use of those reserves for infrastructure, about $2.5 million, $2.6 million in the first year of the biennium, and $2.5 million in the second year of the biennium. Of course, when we're evaluating reserves, remember that we are including inflows for grants and loans, and then for outflows, we would include those loan payments. And so when you look at this presentation of a balanced budget, I want you to know that that's how we account for, in particular in these funds, those grant and loan sources. As we review what happened in 2023 in the wastewater fund, it was really nothing extraordinary. And so we saw revenue increase by the amount of adopted adjustments that you made. Overall, operating expenses declined a little bit. We had increases in some categories and decreases in others, and they more or less offset. So this fund held more or less stable in 2023 with a little bit of growth in revenue. In 2024, we would expect the same behavior in this fund as the water fund, a little bit of revenue growth due to that rate adjustment in April, and the same types of expenditure trend changes that you would expect from the implementation of the compensation study. The water and wastewater fund do behave in very similar ways from a cost standpoint. So when inflation impacts one of these funds, it tends to impact the other in the same way. And so my previous comments stand, and I won't repeat them. But it is nice to see inflation finally under a little bit more control. Before I move on to my summary of forecasted wastewater revenue, do you have questions about financial position in this fund?
Councilors, are there any questions? Seeing none on Zoom, please continue.
Okay. And what I might ask at this point too is if Director Webb has anything he'd like to add to the notes I've made about the capital changes in this fund. Mainly, I'm asking for that feedback to make sure I did a sufficient job presenting some of the changes that have happened. If that's no, that's fine, but. Sounds like no. Here we are.
I hear nothing.
Yeah, Council, I think the significant changes, like Jen said, has just been the cost increases. I mean, West Laramie Lift is a prime example. We originally put that in the budget a few years ago at $2.5 million, and here we are a few years later asking for $9.5 million. So the cost increases, when we talk about just the pipe, it's not that much, but when you start getting into the lift stations with the pumping and all that stuff, the mechanical things have gone crazy. So yeah, from a capital standpoint, big cost increases, and they're hurting. We're doing what we can.
I see no questions.
Honorable Vice Mayor, when we look at forecasted wastewater fund revenue, in capital, you will see some additional revenue sources for the North 3rd Street project, as well as additional funding for the West Laramie main lift station. This is, again, another example of Public Works' ability to go out and secure funding, which we absolutely want. And remember, this loan funding, Director Webb has been securing at what we would consider to be very good rates, especially in this environment, but even objectively in any environment. So we do have to pay these funds back, but we're able to do so over 20 and 30-year terms, and that does really help us manage the impact of these significant steep price increases in what is a rather small fund. Same comments apply to reappropriated amounts. You'll see those in the fall. When you look at wastewater charges, which is the second most significant source of revenue for this fund, you'll see that I forecasted in a similar manner to the water fund. We will meet our revenue forecast in the wastewater fund for this year, and I have forecasted a 5% increase on top of that for fiscal year 2025, and have kept that amount steady at 2026 pending further council action. This would also be a good time for me to point out, in all of our city funds, you're going to see what I consider to be significant investment income budgeted that is being generated due to our cash investment strategy change, and I am forecasting these amounts conservatively as we move into next biennium, because none of us knows what the interest rate environment is going to be. I did a little research before I prepared my forecast, and it looks like a drop of about a percentage point is expected in each year, but we all know that that could change. And so my forecast reflects that declining assumption, and I will adjust that forecast upward if I can, to ensure that we are appropriately reflecting this income in each of the city's funds. That concludes my presentation of revenue, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Councilors, are there any questions? Seeing none on Zoom, we'll continue.
So Council, we're on page 117. You'll see the expenditure summary for the entire wastewater fund on that page. Total budget is $17.7 million recommended for the first year of the biennium and $8.9 million recommended for the second year. Of course, the difference between the two is driven by capital expenditures, which, as we've discussed, are fairly large. I'm recommending some minor changes to the budget amounting to slightly less than 0.5%, and Director Webb will talk you through those. No new personnel recommended in this fund.
Thank you. Council, so again, at the top of page 118, excuse me, at the top of page 118 is that same type of pie chart, and again, you see the capital project stuff is a huge portion, 64% of the budgeted expenditures. Back on page 111, we talk about the division and their goals and objectives. Our wastewater folks are responsible for the collection and treatment of wastewater generated in Laramie. They maintain the wastewater collection system that consists of pipes and manholes and lift stations and the treatment plant. 175 miles of wastewater sewer lines. They treat approximately 3 million gallons per day at the wastewater treatment plant. Some of their goals and accomplishments for this last year was they've been working alongside our contractor and design engineers on the treatment plant upgrades. The project is nearly complete. Staff's been heavily involved in the programming of the systems and training of the new systems out there. I'm told within the first month of running the new blower system out there, we saw a $15,000 decrease in our energy bill, And we're going to continue to monitor that as we move forward, and fingers crossed as we kind of tweak the blowers and the system and get it dialed in right, that number will come down or go up, I guess. Our savings will go up. The wastewater treatment staff also works with our landfill staff a lot with the compost program. So they hauled 342 tons of biosolids to the landfill, built 19 compost piles, and they assisted with all the grinding and screening at the landfill for the compost program. They coordinated with GIS and engineering to locate and identify key utility assets into the GIS system. They utilized the camera truck to identify assets and problem areas within the system. And they leveled and repaired multiple manholes this last year that were sinking and causing driving hazards. There was one on 30th Street they took care of that I really appreciated. The manhole was right in the wheel, where your wheel lane, and over time it had gone down a little bit, and so they level those out so that you're not getting that bump when you go over, and they'll continue those projects on. So to go page 118, we'll hit the operating supplementals. Not as many here. I'm not planning on going over every one again. If you've got questions on any of them, feel free. I'll point out first, right at the top, wastewater admin training. Our folks have to go through their normal training to keep their certification valid, their operator certifications, and then we've identified some supplemental training for supervisors and things like that that they haven't really gotten in the past that we would like to work on. Down in wastewater collection with maintenance agreements, the Pipe Logic support, that's our software we use with the video for the sewer lines. Under wastewater collection, there's a $15,000 ask there under other improvements. So this is for when we have to outsource sewer excavations. We have some sewer lines in town that are really deep, sometimes 15, 20 feet deep, and we don't have the equipment to reach that far. And so we've got to work with some of our local contractors that have that type of equipment to get down there, and that increases the cost. And then in the treatment plant lab services, $6,000. Some of the testing they do out there has increased in cost, and so we're asking to cover that cost. As Janine said, no personnel requests in the wastewater fund, and the centrally budgeted adjustments are mainly utility items. So if there's questions on the wastewater, I'd be happy to take them.
Councilor O'Doherty?
The trucked waste, I saw it as revenue. Is that when people have portable toilets and bring waste to the water treatment or the sewage treatment plant?
Correct, Councilor Joy. We have a drop station there. It's more for the large haulers, right? We don't let motorhomes and things like that come in, but the haulers that are doing the septic out in the county area primarily.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Further questions, councilors? Seeing none on Zoom?
Okay, so next is we're going to roll into solid waste, and I'll turn it over to Director Wade to cover the financial position and revenues.
Vice Mayor, City Council, the Solid Waste Fund is in excellent financial condition, due primarily to rate changes that the city started to implement in 2012. And so of our enterprise funds, the solid waste actually lagged a little bit in terms of when council started adopting those long-term rates. That effort started for water and wastewater, I believe, in 2009, 2010, if I'm remembering that correctly, through organizational memory. And this fund, I was able to trace back the first adjustments to fiscal year 2012. And so that long-term management has been a little bit more recent in this fund, but definitely longer than a decade, a decade-long period. The rate structure in this fund is a little bit different than we have in our other enterprise funds, in that it's structured by the type of service provided. And so we have a rate for our collection services, our disposal services, and our landfill services. And of course, you'll learn more about that this year as we work with our rate consultants and you're engaged in those work sessions. But I just want you to know that even in the overview, because that is a difference in this fund. When we look at the 10-year period for revenue in this fund, it has grown by 58% since 2014. Now, you may, like me, wonder why, not only about this, but everything. Why has it grown so much compared to water and wastewater? Well, when I look back at fiscal year 2011 and 2012, this fund actually only had $3.7 million to its name to perform full solid waste services, including our landfill, which we all know requires significant capital investment, not only in terms of those landfill cell development and the liner costs, but also for our post-closure care liabilities. And so we had a lot of buildup to do in this fund to support that long-term operation, and that's really why you see that 58% increase. Of course, as this financial planning in this fund becomes a little older, it's still relatively new, the percent of that change will decline. But I wanted to make sure I disclosed to you the same information for each of those funds and why they might be different. But that $3.7 million of fund balance amount was pretty shocking to me when I look back and saw it, when you think about what this fund supports.
Councilor Doherty.
Can you give us a page number? I think I'm close.
123.
Absolutely, 124. And the revenue graph I was just referring to is the one on this page. You will not find, what you'll find published in your budget publication is the dollar amount of the change over time, but as I was preparing for this presentation yesterday, I really wanted to know that percent and wanted to explain that to you. And so those numbers I'm giving you will likely add in future publications, but I thought it'd be helpful for this evening. The expenditure change over time is presented on page 125. And again, this is going to look just like that work in the water and wastewater funds. You'll notice that we have 4 months of reserve on hand for operating emergencies at the end of 2023. The reserve is always a little bit lower in this fund because we direct available reserve to funding our post-closure care liabilities when we have those available.
Councilor Newman, you have a question?
All the funds are we trying for the 3 to 6 months?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Vice Mayor. It is actually our policy to have 3 to 6 months of operating reserve on hand for each fund. The budget summary is next. You'll notice that this budget is balanced with the use of less reserves than in the other enterprise funds, about $600,000 in the first year and $200,000 in the second. That's because there's not any significant capital in this biennium. As you know, in the solid waste fund, the capital, the big capital, the landfill liners, is sporadic, and that happens every maybe 4 or 5 years. Director Webb can correct me on that if I'm a little bit off. I probably am. And so really in between, the capital in this fund looks like small improvements to various facilities and operations, in addition to pretty significant fleet acquisitions, because we all know that solid waste equipment can be large and expensive. But that's what you see in terms of capital investment this biennium. When I look at what happened in this fund in 2023, overall service charges grew by 1%. We see a fair amount of variability based on volume at the landfill in this fund. 2023 was a year where we had stability compared to the prior year, but if we look at 2024 today, we've had more volume at the landfill, and that really drives up those service charges based on what people are actually disposing. Last year, operating expenses did increase by 10%, but we also had an increase in personnel costs compared to the prior year. That occurred because we actually added a position for a recycling and diversion coordinator, if I remember that title correctly. And so you're not seeing unusual personnel growth in this fund. It's just simply for that added position that the council approved. Now in 2024, the story is the same as across the other enterprise funds, with the exception of that disposal revenue being higher due to volume variances at the landfill. But all of the other factors I have previously discussed will also apply in this fund. That wraps up my presentation of financial condition for solid waste. I'm happy to take any questions before I provide an overview of revenue.
Any questions, councilors? There are none. Continue, Director Wade.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. As I look at forecasted revenue for 25 and 26 and re-looked at it yesterday in preparation for this work session, what you'll see is that in particular, I've held most of these charges in line or a little bit below the 2024 forecast. So absent knowing what will happen with the rates in this fund, I want to keep that revenue forecast pretty close. You'll notice that there's more of a difference in landfill dump fee revenue compared to the forecast for 2024. That's because I want to hug below what I think. I want to make sure that I hit a target that I know we can achieve regardless of what those volume variances are. So if we have a high year at the landfill, that's okay. But I want to make sure that this revenue forecast reflects what I know will come in the door, and that can change significantly from year to year. I will also acknowledge, as I looked at this yesterday, this forecast is moving up. And so if we continue to see these high years, I will bump that number upward as we move into planning for fiscal year 26, and we absolutely will consider that as we are evaluating rates for the upcoming biennium. That's all I would have for you on the forecast for solid waste revenue.
Councilors, any questions? I see none.
Okay, so council expenditure starts on page 129. Supplementals are recommended in the amount of $165,400 in the first year of the biennium and only $15,400 in the second year. The $165,000 adjustment in year one amounts to about 1.9% of current year budget, just to give you some perspective on that. And total budget recommended for the first year, $6.6 million and $4.8 million for year two. Again, no personnel, and Brooks can talk you through the supplementals that you'll find on the following page.
Director Webb.
Yeah, council. So yeah, page 130. There's just a few supplementals, so I'll just go through each one of them. First, we're requesting $50,000 to complete the rate study. Last time we did the rate study was in 2016, 2017. Rates went into effect in 2018, so it's been a little time, and we need to get it done. The next one is broadband. It's just an increase in the broadband fees in our collection area. Trash and recycling carts, we're requesting $15,000. We've been getting a lot of calls for, yeah.
Councilor Newman.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's going on with what your next sentence was going to be. You're getting a lot of calls. So I just had to have my cart replaced, and they did a fantastic job, so thank you on that. Who eats that cost, though? Does the city eat it when I get a new cart, or does that get pushed on to myself or whoever's getting a new cart? Not that I'm complaining, I don't know the answer to the question.
Yeah, Councilor Newman, code actually allows us to charge the customer for the cart if the damage to the cart was their fault through their negligence. We're reaching a time frame that a lot of the carts are just wearing out, right? It's been, I don't know, 15 years now or so since the cart's been out there on a 10-year warranty. And so we're starting to see more and more replacement of those carts. The lids sometimes don't last quite as long, but those are easy for us to switch out. But yeah, so we're starting to see where the original carts that we put out are starting to wear out. And so as we replace those, as no fault to the customer, that's built in to the fund. We're also getting a lot of calls for additional commercial collections, and so we came last year with a budget amendment so that we could purchase some more commercial containers, and those have all gone out, and we need some more. So that's what those requests are for, is for additional carts, like residential carts and larger commercial containers.
Councilor Doherty?
I have a cart question too while we're here. The wind's been taking its toll. I was wondering if the next round of carts, if there could be something that holds the lids. Like I was thinking about drilling some weight to the front of the lid so that bolting in some weight on the front of the lid. Is there any, or something that could snap and only blows off? Anyway, could we, because this is pretty windy here.
Yeah.
It's always Tuesdays when our...
Councilor Doherty, through you, Vice Mayor, this is always an issue, right, especially this time of year. I'm actually the guinea pig right now. I came home a couple weeks ago and there was this little strap on the front of my trash cart that you put on, and I went to JR, I says, what is this thing? And he goes, oh, we're trying it out with you. and it's for the wind. And the nice thing about it is it's really easy to put on. Some of the ones we've used in the past are hard, kind of, you know what I mean? But this is really easy. It's a rubber little thing that kind of just pops in, and then it's loose enough that when they tip it, it pops open. So we have some out right now that we're trying out. We always start with staff first. We try it out on ourselves first, and so we may see some more of those coming. And staff can actually, these ones we can install ourselves. So even on existing carts and lids that are out.
Councilor Gabriel?
Thank you. I would just point out that a resident told me recently that both of his carts had been damaged by the wind. He called solid waste and he had 2 new carts the same day. He was very pleased.
Councilor Richardson?
I'm just wondering if the city council could also be guinea pigs with experience. It sounds like a real good guinea pig experiment to be a part of.
I can have JR reach out to you.
I see no further questions at this time.
Our last request and the supplemental is a fairly large request, and it's for household hazardous waste removal. As you may recall, we just completed the new household hazardous waste building, and we're starting to process waste in that building, which is great. That building is heated. We can work year round. The old building, we could really only work in there for a couple months out of the year because it was so darn cold, right? And there was no electricity in there, no heat or anything. It's literally just a pole barn. And so over the past few years, the household hazardous waste has kind of piled up in there, and we need to get it removed and cleaned out. We've got a quote from a company that's around $100,000, so that's what that request is for. And then, as Janine said, no personnel requests. So I'll move over to page 123 unless there's any more questions on the supplemental requests.
I see no further questions.
Okay, just quick overview on solid waste. So they provide the solid waste collection and disposal services for the community, as well as residential, business, church, and school recycling services. A few items I wanted to highlight was last year, solid waste diverted nearly 10 million pounds of green waste from the landfill to be used in the compost program. So prior to 2012, that material went into the landfill and is now being diverted, grinded, and used as compost. We actually had a compost-free day last weekend. I don't know if any of you went out there. I think we had 120 folks come in to get free compost, and we got lots more. It's super cheap. That's my plug. We also diverted and recycled 3,589 tires. We sent 2.7 million pounds of single-stream recycling to the MRF for recycling. 51,000 pounds of glass was sent to the recycler. 70,000 pounds of electronic waste was sent to recyclers, and 440,000 pounds of metal was sent to the local salvage yards for recycling. There's more items, but those were the ones with the big numbers, so I wanted to throw those out there. They're doing batteries and all sorts of stuff out there now. It's pretty amazing. Again, when I came back in 2012, we were doing some metal, and that was about it. And to see where we've come and the amount of stuff we're diverting is awesome, and JR and his crew do a great job out there.
Councilor O'Doherty.
I was wondering if Director Webb would share those stats with the Environmental Advisory Committee, because they've been asking about that and didn't realize how much was getting recycled. And
Sure,
well,
yeah.
they're probably going to get it from JR, but since you have it right in front, I would love to.
JR is actually attending the meeting, I think, is it June 6th, next month?
Yeah.
Something like that. And so I'll ask him to bring those numbers with him.
Great,
He's probably
thank you.
already going to anyway, but I'll ask him to make sure he's got them with him and he can relay those. So some of the goals and accomplishments for them last year include the completion of the household hazardous waste building and the loading dock. The loading dock that we had out back that we loaded the single stream recycling in the trailer off of was not in good condition, and so we got that taken care of for safety reasons. One of the big things that JR and Charles, our recycling diversion coordinator, wanted me to point out was that our single stream contamination rate was reduced under 15%, which got rid of the surcharge that has been imposed, and we're thinking that's directly related to some of the education that's being pushed out and to the public. One of the things they were really working on the collection side is route efficiency and safety. So we have a lot of routes that it's the craziest thing. The guys will drive down the street and pick up, then they come down the alley and pick up, then they go down the street and pick up. And so we had a large section, it was about 10 blocks, that it was what we considered a dangerous alley. We had multiple accidents in, and so we moved everything out to the street. One, it's safer for us to pick up curbside rather than it is in the alley. Two, it improves the efficiency, right? We're not going down that alley. In fact, the guys tell me it saved them an hour off their route. And then again, we're reducing emissions when we do that. We usually, when we do that, we do get a few folks complaining, so I wanted to point that out. But after we work with them and we explain with them what we're doing, we can usually resolve those issues. 85% of the accidents that we have in collections occur in the alleys, and so the more we can get out of there, the better. But there are some places where it actually makes sense in the alleys. Around the university with all the parking on the street, a lot of times we're better off in the alley. But where it makes sense, we're trying to jump out of the alley into the street for safety.
Councilor Richardson.
Thank you. I just wanted to share my appreciation. I received one of those complaints about the alley, and the staff were so great about getting back to that person and lending support and trying to figure out, can this person actually get their trash to where it needs to go? They were an older person, and
Sure.
we're just really great about being very, the customer service was super, so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes when that happens, the folks are used to their cart just sitting in the alley, and they carry their little bag out and put it in. Now they got to roll the cart out. And so when we run into elderly people, a lot of times that's where we get the complaints. But we do have a program where our guys carry a list. And if it's somebody that can't physically get that out there, our guys will stop, get out of the truck, and roll that out, dump it, and return the cart back. And so I think I know who you're talking about, and I think we got her on the list. Moving forward, really, most of their goals are based around further opportunities to increase recycling and outreach. Charles is really wanting to get out and do more public stuff. He went to some schools last year. I think he was at the Laramie Rivers Conservation District thing they had down last month or whatever it was. And then he's planning on being out at the Touch a Truck next month with the booth. So anyway, they're really working to get the word out. Still trying to work to get in with the university with their move-in stuff. It's a tough process, but we're still working on that. And with that, if there's no further questions, that's all I got for solid waste.
Councilors, any further questions?
I'll turn it over to the city
And I see none on Zoom.
Okay, turn it over to the city manager to wrap things up.
All right, City Council, so we wanted to just touch on 3 of the other funds, as we call them, that we think that are of interest to you. As I said from the very beginning of our budget hearings this year, we do not intend to cover the specific purpose tax, as we all understand what the projects are because they were approved by the voters. So if you do have questions about SPT or you would like us to cover it, we certainly can, but we did not intend to. So we have 3 funds we wanted to touch on to close out this evening's conversation. They start on page 133 of your booklet, the first being the Economic Development Fund. And I think I will let Jen talk a little bit about the revenue, and we'll talk about expenditure thereafter. It's pretty straightforward.
Vice Mayor, council members, the revenue in this fund comes primarily from agreements that have been negotiated for economic development. And so you'll see various types of lease revenue in particular coming into this fund. Notable leases include Tri-Hydro, Basic Beginnings, the UL building lease. And so because of, in my opinion, good solid negotiations in the past, this fund does continue to receive revenue from those former economic development, really projects that we then recapture revenue fund. And this revenue generated provides us the ability to invest in future economic development projects that benefit our community.
Council, you see we do have the grant coming in from the Plenty project for this year. That project is well underway, and the team working on it are, I believe, moving into sort of finalizing the design. Last I heard, I think that we may be in construction phase in coming months, likely maybe in the fall. But that is a huge facility to be located at Sierra Sky Technology Park, as you know. If you have any other questions about the expenditure, Jen, I wanted to talk about the $100,000 a little bit. That is really just a reserve. Yes. So you'll see $100,000 in fiscal '24 and another $250,000 in fiscal '25. That is just set aside for economic development projects as may occur. So something that council may keep in mind. One thing to know about this fund is that many of the revenues that come into it are restricted. And on this next page, you see kind of a description of that. If you have questions there, Jen, I'm sure, can talk you through that. But the really notable activity in this fund, again, is the Plenty R&D facility being constructed up at Sierra Sky. And we may see something in the ground, starting in the ground this year. That $20 million is the largest ever grant, I would say, secured by the city for economic development. Previous total grants secured for economic development amount to, I think, about $30 million over the last decade, and now this $20 million on top of it. So that kind of gives you some perspective on the scale of that grant compared to the usually about $3 to $4 million 10 projects that we had previously. Okay, so if you don't have questions there, we will move to the next fund, which is E911 on 135. We thought we would touch on this fund because you'll recall from our discussion about LARC that we are making expenditures from this fund this year. So Jen, would you like to talk about revenue a little bit? Sure.
Revenue in this fund is based on a tax related to 911 surcharges. That is the only revenue in this fund, and so we have to be a little bit careful here to make sure that we don't over forecast. Thankfully, revenue in this fund is relatively stable. I think I've kept the revenue forecast around $275,000 a year, and it lands typically around $300,000. And so I'm forecasting really close to the revenue we expect to receive in this fund. We can only use that revenue for specific purposes, which is why it's in a special revenue fund and not, for example, in the general fund, which doesn't carry that restriction.
And you can see the expenditures there noted, largely the capital project and equipment that that Chief Brown spoke to you about, which is new equipment for the dispatch and 911 center next door.
Councilor O'Doherty?
I saw in the paper that 911 services had been going down around the state. Have we had that problem where I guess the telephone line's not meeting? Have we had that?
As far as our emergency lines going down, I'm not aware of any. We did have an outage on the non-emergency line over the weekend, but I haven't seen the article that you're referring to, Counselor, so I may not be fully informed on your question.
I see no further questions.
Okay. And then we wanted to go to the next page, Council, which is the opioid, I cannot say this word. I just cannot. I never can. Opioid Settlement Fund. There, I have to speak very slowly. We thought that you may be curious about the amount that we're receiving here, so I'll let Jen talk about the revenue we're receiving under those settlement agreements.
Vice Mayor and City Council, we do have several settlement agreements now. I think there are 3 or 4, if I'm remembering that correctly, that entitle us to settlement proceeds as those funds are distributed. We do receive those settlement proceeds in accordance with a schedule, but there are provisions in those agreements that if certain things happen, that revenue may or may not come to us. And so what we are forecasting for revenue is an amount we know we can expect to receive next year safely, and what we have made available for appropriations is the amount we had in hand at the date we were preparing the budget. So that appropriation really is revenue that we have already collected, which is why I want to draw your attention to that.
Councillor Newman?
What do we use this fund for?
So I was going to touch on that a little bit, Council. So under the settlement agreements, there are permissible uses of these funds articulated in those agreements. If I were going to generally categorize that, it's for the prevention and treatment of substance abuse. There are other categories, but that's the really big overriding category. The plan for these funds is, so you'll recall, you have a goal this year to basically bring together a task force of knowledgeable individuals from the community who will then make recommendations to the city and to the Board of County Commissioners, because the county is also receiving funds. They're receiving slightly less than the city, but the notion was that if we choose as a city and county government to combine our efforts and coalesce around goals for using these funds, maybe we can get more bang for the buck down the road. So at this point, City Attorney Bob Southard, you may want to ask him for an update. He may know more currently than I do. He was going to spearhead that effort of bringing together the subject matter experts and have them work out recommendations to bring to the governing bodies. I'm not aware if they've met recently. I know in December, I got a little ahead. I started trying to pull the group together, and he called me and said, "I'm doing this, Janine, back off." So I kind of backed off. So he may know more than I do at this point, but that is what we will use these funds for, and that's the intention right now. Ultimately, the governing bodies will decide, but we hope to bring you recommendation from folks who work in this field every day.
I see no further questions.
Okay, so Council, the remaining other funds are our health insurance fund, which we will be closing out. As you know, we're no longer self-insured. You can see the numbers and cents of that in the booklet. The Cemetery Perpetual Trust Fund, the Parks and Rec Development Fund also notes the projects in Parks and Recreation that will be funded from that fund. And then, as I mentioned, the specific purpose tax from 2018. We're happy to cover anything in those areas, or if you have questions, as you peruse it on your own, you can always send us those questions. We'd be happy to answer them. And I'll remind you, you do have your special meeting and work session on the 22nd, right? Okay. Absolutely. I thought I had a moment of panic thinking I had the date wrong, of May, where we could also address any lingering questions you might have about the operations and maintenance budget. I wanted to close out by mentioning something that I realized literally last night that I neglected to include in my transmittal letter at the front of this booklet that I intended to include, and that was to tell you, I usually highlight any changes in personnel or compensation, and I neglected to tell you in that letter that I did recommend as part of this budget for all city employees 2% compensation adjustment during the biennium, and so I wanted to disclose that here, that is embedded in all of the budgets that you've looked at, 2% for the biennium for salary adjustments. I don't know the timing of when those will be dispersed. We're having some conversation about making those available on anniversary review dates for employees, or talking about doing that at a set time of year, maybe mid-year, January or something. So we're working through that and how we may integrate that into kind of a more performance-based process. But we haven't made the decision yet, but we do have a reserve set aside of 2% amounting to that in every single fund.
Counselors, are there any final questions? Counselor Newman?
Only because I know somebody's going to ask me. The 2%, does that include upper management?
When we put the reserve aside for 2%, it includes everybody in the city except your contractual employees, which is myself, the city attorney, and the municipal judge. And in that case, it would depend on the contract that you have with those individuals, if they automatically receive cost of living adjustment or if they do not.
Further questions? City Manager, oh, I see none.
Okay. So council, that concludes what I had prepared for this evening, unless you have any questions for us.
We have no one in the audience, nor do I see anyone in attendance. So if there are no further questions, then we are adjourned. Thank you very much.